Well, hello, Brad fans. What is up? How are you doing? This episode is for the political junkies, and specifically the Canadian political junkies. Oof, what a niche audience we are going for here, but you guessed it, the panel of ordinary gentlemen, ordinary Canadian citizens is back to discuss all matters Canadian politics. Specifically, we focus on a recent Supreme Court of Canada's decision regarding carbon taxes, what that means for our home province of Alberta, the oil producing heart of the nation. We also talked a little bit about provincial conservative strategy, the fight back strategy, how it's going, recent polling that has them down, where do they go from here. We then rolled that into a conversation about the federal conservatives, the trouble they had over their policy convention, basically the trouble the leader of the federal conservatives, Aaron O'Toole, had at his policy convention, trying to drag the party to the center and being dragged instead to the right by attendees at that convention. We explain all that and discuss what it means moving forward in a potential spring election. What could the Liberals possibly do to boner this up? And tent size. How big is your political tent? How big should it be? All of this and more hard-hitting political commentary from the people to the people, from the regular ordinary dudes. So I thank them for being here. I thank you for being here, and please follow us on Twitter or Instagram at 2bradforyou. You can send us an email, 2bradforyou@gmail.com. You can send us a voice message, and we will play it on the show, speakpipe.com/2bradforyou. As always, follow, subscribe, never miss an episode, leave us a comment, rate us highly if you will. And yes, that's it. Again, we thank you so much for being here. Here is our super niche conversation on Canadian politics. Too Brad for Politics is back. All right, gentlemen, welcome back. We have the distinguished panel of ordinary gents, the citizenry of the country, of the province of Alberta, on time this time. That's inside baseball to throw Coleman under the bus for screwing up last weekend's recording by not knowing which day was Saturday and which day was Sunday. So, Coleman from the frozen north of Edmonton, how's your Sunday going?
Oh, it's good. It's actually Sunday this time. I thought for sure that
Yeah.
the 19th was a Sunday. I didn't even look. I knew in my heart that that was
You're
true.
wrong.
I blame my casual alcoholism for making it difficult to know what day it is, and I'm happy to be on the show again.
Yeah, well, and that's your truth. Those are your facts. Sticking to it. I'm happy that we all made it here with the time change down south in Calgary. Steve, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, Brad. Thanks for having me. Never felt more ordinary on this Sunday, which I think is going to really boost the show.
Yeah, like I said, the ordinary citizenry. Real talk, straight from the people to the people, and also in Calgary, Scott, as always, looking good. That alleged webcam that you've been saying you're gonna buy for weeks now is. I'm assuming it's just in the mail, right? Right.
It is in the mail, yeah. It's coming shortly. It's just us ordinary folk. Things take a little longer than, ritzy podcast hosts from Europe. So, it takes a little while. I believe it is actually in the Suez Canal. My webcam is, it's coming as soon as they can move that boat. And how are they going to move that boat? My God.
When you only got one backhoe in the entire region, I mean, it's going to be difficult, right? Look at this. Topical humor. Topical humor on a Sunday. Beautiful. Well, gentlemen, we're all here. We're all ordinary. Well, I guess let's just say let's give ourselves a little credit. We all have university degrees, correct? In various topics. Well, and I was going to say we have university degrees, each of us, from fine Western Canadian, I believe,
prestigious institutions.
Albertan institutions, not flavored by that Laurentian Upper Canada bullshit, right? So let's start with our home province of Alberta. And I guess it's kind of a national story, but it's big for Alberta because the Premier of Alberta was a big player in the push to repeal the carbon tax, repeal the federal carbon tax. And this recently made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, which upheld the federal carbon tax in a 6-3 decision. For a little bit of context, the Canadian government deemed it wise that the entire country have some sort of a carbon plan, some sort of a carbon pricing plan. The provinces were free to make their own plan, which the previous Alberta government did, saying that it was better to have an Alberta solution where the money stays in Alberta rather than flows to the federal government. I believe a few other provinces did the same, New Brunswick being one of them. And there was a deadline. If you didn't have a plan in place, then you were stuck with the federal plan, and you didn't have much say in how that was rolled out or where the money went. Although most plans, the Alberta plan that was scrapped by this new government, and the federal plan that is now constitutional according to the Supreme Court of Canada, and in place in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, the 3 provinces that brought the lawsuit out, the majority of the money gets rebated back to have-nots, to use Canadian political lingo, people that make under a certain threshold of income. So it's kind of a rebate. It's kind of a payback thing. Has implications for Alberta because Jason Kenney, in his strategy, his bold strategy of fighting for the energy sector, made this a big point of his election campaign to scrap the carbon tax, as he said, which he did as soon as he got in, and followed through with the promise to fight this one all the way to the Supreme Court, which, according to the sources I read, was destined to lose, or at least the odds were not in his favor. So the question is, where do they go now? And what do we think of the so-called fight-back strategy that Kenney has employed? Because we can see there's a lot of ongoing fights on the board, but not a lot of wins, unless you count Bigfoot. I don't know if they've slayed Bigfoot yet, if the dedicated war room, energy war room, has felled the mythical creature. Other than that, I don't know if we can count a lot of wins on the board. I'll jump to you first, Steve. I've said enough. What do you think of where they go from here, I guess, and what this means for the fight back strategy? Can they keep going with the fight back strategy, or is it time to throw in the towel and maybe make peace on some front?
Yeah, excellent recap of the court decision, Brad, and the perspective of Alberta and the other provinces. It seems like, based on the reaction of Jason Kenney to these events, that he does want to continue to fight back, but he didn't have a plan, a backup plan. He thought this was just going to go his way. And so stand by for more action at a later time, brought to you by the Alberta taxpayers. Thank you. In all seriousness, though, the decision's super interesting, I think, constitutionally. I think the two sides that are arguing about this decision now, kind of in the public square, versus this is activism or a political judiciary that has made a choice based on their own personal feelings rather than upholding the Canadian Constitution. And then, of course, there are...
You're talking about the judges in that
exactly,
sense, that they made the decision. Yeah.
And the other side of that is that they did exactly what they were supposed to do based on the Constitution. Like the Canadian Constitution has always upheld that there will be new things that we'll have to decide what the jurisdiction is, whether it be federal or provincial. I mean, just an example of that is the travel industry or the aeronautics industry, I guess you could say, that came up well after they were kind of divvying up jurisdiction. So this is a new thing. Obviously, it needed to be determined if it was within the national interest to have this standard, I guess you could say, or threshold of action. And they decided to do it. There's lots of debate around that. Obviously, it wasn't unanimous even on the court. It was a 6-3 ruling. So we'll see. There is no fight legally to make anymore. That's the highest court. So
there's nothing left to fight on that.
So
yeah.
for Kenny, I mean, the thing I would have liked to have heard from him is we don't agree with the federal carbon tax. We don't agree with the court ruling. However, given that now this is decided upon, we can move forward, and we will move forward with the Canadian plan, which at least gets the money rebated back to us, to the province, and we're just going to move forward with that. You could even take some shots at Trudeau on the way out, call it the Trudeau carbon tax, do your usual sweet gunslinging, blow on the gun for how much heat you bring, Mr. Kenny. But yeah, that would have been what I...
In his Stampede outfit.
That's right. That's what I would have liked to have heard. That makes the most sense to me anyway. And then, but no, he just kind of said, well, we don't know what's going on, so we'll figure it out. We'll consult with our lobbyists and get back to you.
See what you did there. Yeah, his statement that we don't have a backup plan was kind of shocking, because it's like you had to know that this was at least, if not, a 60-40 or higher chance, at least a 50-50 chance that this decision is not going to go your way. So to kind of stand up there in front of the microphone and say we don't have a backup plan is weird. It seems like a bad strategy, bad comms move. I can't imagine, but maybe they were really caught off guard. Another point that was brought up, I was watching an interview points with Mount Royal political science professor Dwayne Bratt. He's on the news a lot in Calgary. Interesting guy to follow for news on this stuff and insight. And he brought up the point that when Kenny repealed the carbon tax, the Alberta carbon tax that Notley put in, the previous government, they said, we're going to get rid of it, we're going to fight this thing in the federal one, and we will not implement another one. Like any new tax has to go to a referendum. So he kind of boxed himself into the corner with that one. Now, Professor Bratt was saying that they didn't actually amend the language of the law so that they're held to it. But there's video, that he made these statements saying, we're not going to, we will not make an Alberta solution. So basically, you're stuck with the federal one. And I like what you said there, Steve. You can do that, and you can just call it the Trudeau tax and use it to rile up your base from now to the next election, which I think is the other thing that Professor Bratt brought up was there's two sides to the fight back strategy. There's the political side, which seems to play well to his base, and it won him the election in 2019. But there's the policy side, where there is 0 wins. So, jumping on that idea of what is the fight back strategy, and where do we go? Where do they go from here? Coleman, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think. Oh, it's when you look at stuff that he said that he can't walk back. I mean, there was a point where he said that he wasn't interested in being involved in having the government pick winners and losers in the economy, and then he went out and spent $7 billion on a pipeline that isn't going to get built now. So I don't think he'll have any issues walking this back.
I think in his defense there, he said he didn't want the government picking winners. He didn't oppose picking losers.
He's very good at picking losers. It's just I think they're in their mind this fight would go a lot. This climate or like this carbon tax challenge is going to be mostly just a PR victory or a PR battle anyway. I think any reasonable person would have seen that there wasn't a huge chance that this was going to be overturned.
Mind you, the Alberta courts did say that they agreed with the Alberta government, so they had that win.
Yeah, I mean that's good. We got that going for us. It's like when we have our referendum on equalization, I'm sure they'll agree with us too on that. I think in his mind he was gonna fight this Trudeau government, then the Trudeau government was gonna be very unpopular, and it was gonna be just easy wins for him to rack up for his base, even if they lost. And it's like right now it's all just kind of falling apart because he's the You say he's disappointed that he goes up and doesn't have a plan for replacement carbon tax or anything like that. It's like that's kind of par for the course for this guy. Like he's not a great leader or anything like that. He in a former life he was a great political operator as like an MP for the Harper government. And he did some good work in Ontario as far as drumming up support goes. But it's like anytime you ever heard of him in any sort of spotlight when he was an MP and a cabinet minister, it was usually bad. It's like he'd screw something up, and now it's like every time he's in front of a camera, he's doing something bad and screwing up and kind of embarrassing us. He's just not really cut out for leadership. It's kind of for the opposite reason that Justin Trudeau's good at being prime minister, because he's very good at those like going out front of camera moments and making good statements and things like that. And Kenny's just the opposite, like every way. Guy's like Mr. Magoo when he goes out in front of like a press conference. Like I don't know what the fuck he's doing most of the time.
Well, and that was the narrative on him coming in, was that he was this like amazing political operator, right? And I wonder if maybe I'm just thinking on off the top of my head here, and then Scott, you can jump in. But when you're surrounded by people that agree with you in this province, like you roll in on this white horse of we're gonna all these things are so popular, everybody wants me, like there's nothing to operate in. It's like, okay, you've done all the political maneuvering, you've done all the political operating in order to unite the conservative parties, win the election, drum up support, all of this stuff, get the oil sector people behind you. But now when it comes to governing and making policy, there's no one to operate against, like you have these sort of scapegoats that you use, but just scapegoating somebody doesn't make for good policy. So now you have nothing to stand
that's all
on.
he
I don't know,
all
Scott,
he does is the scapegoat thing. That's like literally his only play is like to blame. He blames the Trudeau government, and now he's been blaming the NDP, the ex-NDP government, and that's going to go in the opposite way. They're like building popularity off of that. So
yeah, well, and we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, I think it was easy enough for him to kind of ride in and say, on a wave of sort of anger at the NDP and Alberta Conservatives, I think had a bit of a sense of sort of a divine right of kings to rule the province, and then it was a bit of a rude shock when the NDP came in. So it was easy enough for Kenny to kind of show up and say, don't you hate these people? We won't be like these people. But that's easy enough. It's like, okay, you're not going to do what they did. What are you going to do? And then when it comes into actually having to, as you said, make policy or come up with plans, it's easy enough to say we're not going to be like them. But then what are you going to do? This whole thing where they just didn't have any sort of backup plan, you're right, seems very much in keeping with this sort of governance style. Like how any sensible leader on a 50-50 shot, that seemed more like a 90-10 shot you're going to lose, to not have a backup plan. I think like the Canadian military has a plan for if the United States invades us. Like if you're a proper institution, you have all sorts of contingency and backup plans, and it seems there's none of that. Also, I honestly think that's probably good, because I would rather that Alberta stick with the federal program of just rebating most of it rather than whatever we would come up with, because I have little doubt that whatever the Kenny government would come up with would be worse overall. My younger brother lives in Saskatchewan, where he'd been saying some of the talk is their plan might include just rebating fuel prices, like just using the carbon tax to make gas cheaper, which seems like really the opposite of kind of what you're trying to achieve here.
What the goal of this is, yeah.
Yeah, which I guess would be sort of a stick in the eye to you Laurentian enviro liberal elites. But I think they haven't really thought through a lot of the implications of how this sort of makes the province look internationally. If you're screaming from the heavens that our entire oil and gas industry will collapse under a carbon pricing regime, like the entire world is trending that way. There's been noises, American petroleum lobbies are basically, I think they themselves have come to the conclusion that something is going to be done, and it's either going to be carbon taxes or regulation. And they acknowledge that carbon taxes are going to be the cheapest way for industry to adapt. So it seems the world is trending pro carbon tax, and Kenny is increasingly on this island by himself, screaming from the heavens. And even then, Alberta, when they canceled the provincial carbon tax, they still left there are taxes and caps on large emitters that represent the bulk of our province's emissions. So, Alberta always had a carbon tax of sorts, or a, carbon regulatory regime, but they just, didn't want to advertise that too much. But it's still, it's the way the world's going. And I think it's a bit silly that they would just continue to drive their heads further into the sand on that.
Yeah, so then looking at, let's broaden it to the whole fight back strategy or fight strategy, because that is what this government seems to be their way of governing. It was doctors, it was fighting against public health restrictions. It was, what else have we, the Bigfoot thing. If people don't know, the $30 million a year war room, so propaganda center for the oil industry, took on a children's movie where Bigfoot fights literally cartoonish oil executives in Alaska or something. Great use of taxpayer money. The inquiry that has also been an embarrassment. The inquiry into foreign funded activists operating against the oil industry in Alberta that has yet to produce the report and is a couple $1 million over budget. That's another fiasco. How much of this, at what point can they keep up with this until the next election, which is 2 years from now? And maybe we start to bring in the polling numbers here, because the UCP polling numbers are terrible, have been on a decline really since, according to some polls, one I was looking at from the University of Alberta, since they came into power, really. Popularity started declining since 2019 when they came into power, and has only gotten worse since August of 2020. Reaching new lows just recently. But at what point they've walked back some policies, though they publicly walked back, the coal policy or the selling off the parks policy, although it remains to be seen how much they actually walked back, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the background which would say they haven't actually done that.
They haven't walked it back at all.
Yeah, but it just seems like, is this sustainable? Is the electorate still on board with fighting back? I mean, you think about just with the carbon tax fight, you've lost, I think it was like $1 billion in revenue that the Alberta carbon tax was bringing into the provincial budget. I mean, a lot of that got rebated, but you're still coming out with a net positive there. You have the money of just doing the lawsuit, which is a couple million, which is, in budget standards pretty small. But then also, there's rumblings out of the energy industry, if you look at some of the reporting there, that they're pulling back investment because of political instability. And a lot of that is caused by the fighting. So, yeah, I don't know. Who wants to jump in there? I guess maybe we can bring it back to you, Steve. But I don't see what the way forward is without having to sort of put up, at least start trying to build some bridges.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly the plan is to keep up this notion of us against them, and them being the Trudeau government, or however you want to put it, the liberal elites of Central Ontario, Netflix, Biden, whomever. That's clearly the plan. Whether or not it'll work, I have no idea. And clearly, if we go back to their not having a backup plan for the carbon tax, they do frame the response to it is, rather than say we will take this plan on, they frame it as we're not ready. They would prefer to seem obtuse and confused. They would prefer that be the perception than to the perception to be that they are adopting something that Trudeau did. right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Like you said, they could have played it as we're being, look at, this is another example of them forcing some shit on
yeah,
us. Fuck those
and
guys.
if that ends up working for them, then the electorate is I don't know, pretty dim in terms of how much they're actually observing. I think it's pretty clear that the electorate is paying attention, and like, listen, 2 years is a whole era of politics for this party, perhaps before the next election. So
They could even have a new leader by then.
yeah, I wouldn't bet on it,
Probably not,
but so 2 years, that a lot could happen in 2 years, and a lot will be forgotten, and that's just how it kind of works, right? But if the election were held today, the NDP would form a government. I would have to believe, and
yeah.
so is that their strategy? It's clearly their strategy. It's clearly not very well thought out, I don't think, because they could do it in a much more kind of clear way where they don't seem so incompetent all the time. But will it work? I don't think so. I don't know. We'll see how
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes from here. But
It definitely
'Cause I
seems
think
like they thought this was going to be easier. Like this whole governing thing.
well, it's because
It definitely feels like they thought it was going to be easier, that these fights that they started, that the public would be with them and that they could just roll ahead with the agenda, no problem, and that these things were just going to go their way.
I think a big part of that is because largely they're outsiders, right?
Yeah,
To the
not
province,
from Alberta.
and in a sense, they are steeped in another type of Laurentian kind of politics, and I think that they could come here and take advantage of the province. That's how it seems to me, and that's how their actions play to me. And I think it's fairly obvious. So who will it end up working for them? It's a really terrible thing to have found out about you if you're an outsider. You came to a province with the idea that you could rule the province and do whatever you wanted and line the pockets of certain people and exhibit a blend of corruption and incompetence and continue to be voted in. So I hope that the polls are indicating that they are being found out right now.
Yeah, I think it'll be kind of the key question for me going into the election over the next 2 years, as far as the whole fight back strategy goes. I think for a portion of the electorate, the fight is not just means to an end; it is the end in itself. Like, people just want to see fighting, especially as politics seems to get more partisan and more heated. If you've got people essentially like, those people are bad, so these guys are fighting them and I hate them, so that's all that really counts for me. They hate the people that I hate, whether or not they're actually achieving anything tangible. So the question for me would be, what portion of their base is satisfied with fighting for fighting's sake, and what portion is actually hoping to see some results and is going to be pretty disappointed that, as we've said, they're just not there. They haven't seemed to win on virtually anything. So this sort of performative, we're going to fight everyone on all fronts all the time, it works as a campaign strategy. It clearly doesn't seem to be working as a governing strategy. So then come the next election, when you actually have to run on your record, will people's perceptions be, will it either be, hey, they fought, or will people say, but they lost every fight? So does it matter that they were, stomping their feet in the news or anything like that if they didn't actually win anything? And it seems Trudeau's pretty unpopular in Alberta, though I saw recently actually Trudeau's approval rating as a leader is higher than Kenny's in Alberta, which has got to raise some alarm bells for them.
Yeah.
So
you bring up an interesting point about like what section of the base is going to be satisfied with this, and I think we'll talk about the federal Conservatives in a bit, and the troubles with the base there. But maybe this fight strategy is going to be part of the downfall, because you have people like, if you do have to start walking things back, like let's take for example the public health measures. Look at how that played in that base, right? The hardcore base, some of the hardcore base of Kenny hated that, right? So if you're starting all these fights and everyone loves the fights, but then only half of the base has the stomach to follow through with some of the fights, but the other half is like, no, you're not fighting enough, you're not going far enough, you're splitting your support. And yeah, who knows, let's see what happens, because there's definitely rumblings of, the caucus isn't happy, not everyone is happy. There could be some fracturing going on there. Coleman, did you want to jump in?
No, I'm good. No, I'm in. I think it's kind of interesting because like the last two conservative governments in Alberta, was it Stelmach and then Redford, both kind of came undone in similar ways to the way this one appears to be kind of coming undone, where I think governing that coalition between the Wildrose side of the party and then the PC side of it's not gotten any easier over the years. It's gotten a lot more difficult, actually, because just the way you see that whenever the Kenny government makes a mistake, it's pretty impressive how universally panned it is amongst like pretty much everyone for different reasons. But like you think like one of them would be like, oh, this is good. Like their COVID restrictions are, it's like it's not hard enough for half the province, or probably more than half the province, and then the Wild Rose one is like, it's ridiculous. Like they're locking us in our homes. This is absurd. It's like you think at some point you would make one group happy, you know? Like,
yeah, just by throwing darts at a dartboard, you would get something. Yeah,
and I don't think he's capable of like he's talking about changing the strategy before the election. I don't think they're capable of it. I don't think Jason Kenney can run any sort of campaign that isn't blame others for all your problems. I think that's the only one he's possibly capable of. Oh, there's going to be a big sneeze from Barg there. I was getting braced for it. I don't think he's capable of doing anything else. I think they're only saving grace if oil prices magically rebound and like maybe they can campaign on that, but I think we're looking at a very interesting election coming up in 2 years. I don't think it's a slam dunk that the NDP will take over, but like I don't think a minority PC government is out of the question at all. Just the way that these guys seem incapable of getting out of their own way at all. And it's been like, and it's not just like I say, it's not just this conservative government. The last two were very similar when it seemed like kind of like this infighting over what direction to go with it kind of brings them down in the end.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, you brought up an interesting point. That's something that I was thinking about too. Is like, what would it take for obviously 2 years is a long time. Like Steve said, it could be a whole era. What it would take in order to sort of like, what are people going to remember? What's the legacy going to be? What's going to be the taste in people's mouth by the time they go to the polls? Who knows? But I'm not sure that just rebounding oil prices, or that oil prices can rebound high enough to forget about all this stuff. I don't know. But let's take a look at
I think the other.
Yeah.
I was going to say, a quick thing with the oil price rebound is kind of a lot of what I've been reading is a lot of what companies have been doing during the downturn is investing in automation and technologies that essentially you can extract the same amount of oil with fewer workers. Yeah. And it seems even if prices went to $100 a barrel tomorrow, it's not like it's going to be there. The money will come, like the royalties will come. It'll be great for the shareholders of the companies, but it's not going to lead to the same sort of employment levels or, $120,000 a year job straight out of high school for anyone who wants one. I don't think those days are ever coming back. Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, had the impression that Jason Kenney was bringing those days back. And I don't think that's just the way the market is now. I don't think that's ever coming back.
I mean, there was a piece in the Calgary Herald, I think it was the Herald not too long ago, that said, as oil prices are, because they are rebounding a little bit since the beginning of the pandemic. I think $70 a barrel was one of the recent highs.
That Suez Canal boat's not hurting either.
Yeah, right. Let's not forget about old Bodie McBoatface.
That could have been an inside job by Kenny.
Yeah, was that a Kenny plant?
Ah.
The first big win.
What a win that would be if it comes out like years from now, like the documents get unclassified and it's Jason Kenney and a fake mustache in the
Or
at the
his
helm
former
of the
chief
boat.
of staff that he had to fire. Yeah.
Brian Bateson is undercover sabotaging
It was
boats.
Harper. It was Harper and Harper's son. He hired Harper's son for a reason. Now I lost my train of thought. No, the piece was basically just saying that like economic recovery could come to Alberta, but it's not going to be equal. Like it's not, the jobs aren't going to be there. It's going to be largely the recovery will be felt by the people who didn't need the recovery to begin with, the people who were least affected by the pandemic. So the people at the top.
That's kind of just modern
I wanted
economics,
to-
though. Is like fuck everyone else as
Yeah.
long as the people on top
Yeah.
can recover. I mean, I'll recover because I'm so fabulously wealthy that I don't worry about it that much. But
Yeah. Well, then you're a man of the people, so I'm assuming you could just start a GoFundMe and people would fund that shit.
oh yeah, definitely Stoley'd be in.
Are you eating a Fabergé egg right now?
It's filled with caviar.
Straight from Russia. Okay, quickly before we move to the federal, the polling we've alluded to the polling that the NDP are up, UCP are down. Kenny's favorability rating is down. Notley's is up and kind of remaining stable. We probably don't have time to break down the nuances of it. And I only had a chance to look at one breakdown sort of the polling data. And again, it's not the Leger and it's not what's the Angus Reid, and it's not that one. It's Progress Alberta, I think is the name of it, or something like this.
Main Street did one.
Yeah, the one I saw it's run by researchers at the University of Alberta, but it was the one that I found that had regional breakdowns. So, because that's the question. You can look at the overall support and see, NDP at 40 and UCP at 30, which already is kind of shocking. But what's the regional support? What's that like? Because what we see, obviously, well, every time NDP has Edmonton locked down. Calgary is usually pretty blue, and the rurals are pretty blue. But when you looked at a breakdown from suburban, rural, and urban, I don't know exactly how they categorized all of those. Where you would expect the UCP to still have their support, the rural, it's dropped a lot there too. Now the NDP support in those areas hasn't jumped up as high as suburban. NDP support has stayed pretty stable, but they've gained a lot in urban, and the UCP has dropped in all three categories: rural, suburban, and urban. So where are those votes in the rural going to? I'm assuming the Independence Party, the Western, Exit Party, whatever it is, these other
It's like
parties
the Wild
where they're
Rose
just not going to
Independence
vote.
Party. We just made up another Wild Rose Party to replace the old Wild Rose
Yeah.
Party.
Yeah. NDP support did go up in rural though, like I believe so. I don't have the numbers in front of me. So, but there was some interesting breakdowns. The central region of Alberta, so basically everything north of Calgary and south of Edmonton was strongly blue. Everywhere else was trending towards NDP, although Calgary was kind of still a battleground, it looked like. So it's kind of some interesting breakdown there. But the overall question then is, do you think that the support is the shift in support in the polls is a protest against the UCP government or an acknowledgement of support for the potential NDP government? Is it a protest vote, or is there actual momentum behind support for the NDP? And what would you need to see from the NDP in order to make sure that they turn that that it actually is support for them? We'll go quickly around. Start with you, Steve.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the rural support fading for Kenny is, one of his less heralded battles was with rural municipalities. What a genius.
Right. Another battle
to fight those guys. I think it's interesting. I don't think that a lot of people say, hey, Rachel Notley, why don't you rebrand? That's something we hear. Rebrand away from the NDP, um, become the new Democratic Party. I don't know. That's just an idea. And NDP. Um, Go for it. You can have it if you want. No, a rebrand or to merge with the Alberta Party. I've heard people say that too. Get a centrist kind of merge going. I don't really agree with either of these because I take my cues from Coleman, who's shaking his head right now and frowning. That's all I've got. No, I don't know about the. I think we'll see the election happen, and then I think that I don't think that Notley has to do any of those things to be successful, but I do think that the Conservatives can be again successful in the province if they um, split the party and stop big tenting. Stop trying to tent everyone. Some people just want to get wet, man. And I would say the same with the federal party. I think we're going to get into that in a bit. I think they're just so afraid of the other party, in this case the NDP, becoming the mainstream. Right? They've been the mainstream in Alberta for so long. They don't want to get into a place where the other party is dominant, right? Because they see that as a risk because they've been in that position for so long. But like Canadian politics works best when there are ebbs and flows between parties, leaderships change, it doesn't get stale. Go with your Tory Conservative Party, let the Wildrose Party have their own base, and that's what I would recommend. Like, I'm assuming this is after the autopsy of their loss to the NDP, who haven't rebranded, who have stayed orange, as Coleman has directed them to. And so that's what I would say in the aftermath of their upcoming loss in 2 years. Get a good, Alberta-based hardworking guy or girl to lead the party as a Tory center-right party, and leave the kind of nut jobs who have as big a voice now as they've ever had with COVID. Leave that to their own party, and I think they'll be happier with their own party. At the end of the day, I don't think they want to be in the tent anymore either. The thing I always go back to, and sorry for rambling on about this, the thing I always go back to is, if Jason Kenney loses the next election, do you think for 1 second he's going to stay in Alberta, lead an opposition party? Do you think he's going to continue to work for values? He's going to continue to put it on the line for the Albertans that he, feigns to be on their side above all else? Hell no, he is out of here. Look at Brian Jean. I mean, you can say this is my guy, or he's not my politics, or he is. Doesn't matter. He's here in the province, having his home destroyed every 18 months.
That's true.
And he's working his ass off.
Shockingly accurate.
He's working his ass off for Albertans. Notley, the other example, working her ass off, and she'll never go anywhere. She won't accept like some private job in Ottawa, like Kenny obviously will. So yeah.
Well, Kenny could stay in Alberta and just work for Harper. But you're right. He's not gonna. I don't see him as staying on as the opposition. All of this rhetoric of working for Alberta and doing all this for the good people of Alberta, it rings hollow to me. Maybe it doesn't to some other people, but I think that's a good point, and I'm interested in the strategy of forget the fringes and just run with what the center. Get the majority. That maybe you don't have the massive majority in the legislature that you once had, but you could probably still govern, maybe even as a minority, or just not as big of a majority as you want.
Or maybe not every
I think that
single
doesn't
time,
work.
right?
Yeah, right. Um, I think that maybe that to me that's intriguing because it could work because then it probably takes the wind out of the sails of the sort of fringes, right? Right now they have a voice because you've given them a voice. You've courted them and you've given them a voice. And again, we'll get to the federal conservatives and the problems there too. But if you just say, hey, you know what, we don't need you anymore. We're going to go it alone. Let them fracture and fight it out amongst themselves. Maybe a lot of people start saying, well, maybe I'm not totally on board with all of this progressive Tory stuff, but I'm definitely not on board with the NDP. But they start to look at the fringe and the Wild Rose or the Exit, the Independence Party, as a wasted vote, right? And so I got to put my vote somewhere. So I'm going to put it to where it's most aligned to me, and that would still be the center right blues. Scott, I haven't heard from you in a bit.
First off, I think Barg, you're right. If Kenny loses, he'll announce his resignation at his concession speech. It will, he will waste no time on that. Looking forward, it's 2 years away. At this point, I would bet it's 50-50 if they get reelected or not. It will depend largely on the economy.
But so do you think the
to a
current
large
polling
extent, because
is support for the NDPs or a vote against, or like a protest against the UCP?
I think it's, a bit of both. I think it always helps former leaders. It was like Notley was the worst thing that ever happened, and then someone just so brazenly incompetent comes after you that
Makes you long for what you
all
had.
of a sudden, you look a lot better in retrospect compared to the goons that are currently in charge. So I think there's a lot of people looking back to say, really, Notley wasn't that bad. I had one of my probably most conservative friends say, like, I would vote for the NDP because they were at least struck me as like reasonably competent governance as opposed to what we're getting from these guys. So, I'd say for him, maybe it's a bit of both. It's a bit a protest vote. Like, I just can't have these morons running things. And that's given me a bit of nostalgia for at least, grown-ups who were trying, whether or not they were actually succeeding. I think a lot of it will come down to how rural Alberta goes if these independence parties can actually pull off some votes, because right now the Conservative Party holds essentially every rural seat in the province, and if they win every rural seat again, they almost need nothing in the cities, and they can still form a majority government. I'd love to see a minority situation, but it seems impossible. Basically, there's only two parties that are going to win any seats. So it's hard to come up with a scenario where we see a minority government after the next election, barring something, shocking of the Alberta Party or the Wild Rose Independents or someone pulling out some seats to split the deadlock. But otherwise, one party is going to get 50 plus for sure. And I think if the economy is, recovering and people have jobs and things look good, then they probably win again, because just historically, worldwide, when, people are when they're doing well and taking home good paychecks and people generally don't vote for change. You look at the economy was in the dumps when the NDP came in, and the economy was somewhat in the dumps when they lost, because that's historically how people seem to vote. So it'll depend a lot on how the economy goes in the next 2 years, and if they manage to piss off rural Alberta enough that some of them will consider voting for the NDP. There, I think it would be largely protest. Certainly, I don't get the sense of a lot of love for the NDP from rural Alberta, but at some point would say, you know what, I've had enough of these incompetent goons. Like, the NDP won a bunch of rural seats, I think largely through protest votes in 2015, and they might just be able to squeak it through if Kenny continues to talk about stripping off the mountains and getting rid of the parks and fighting with rural municipalities and driving away all the rural doctors. They see it's almost as if they're just seeing how much will you people put up with before you'll still vote for us, and they might.
Well, and
so.
that's one of the bonuses of having that super majority, right? Is they've been able to do some stuff. They've been able to cram through some legislation and do some things that, maybe if you had less seats in parliament, or God forbid a minority, you wouldn't be able to do, or maybe you wouldn't have the gall to do. Last word on this, go to you, Coleman. Do you think that I'll just throw something out for you to jump on the fact that the NDP has governed before? It's no longer this mystery. You know, they've shown they can do it. They've shown they can win, and they've shown that they can put together a competent, we'll say, government. It didn't all go their way, but you might disagree with either way. But it proves there's an alternative, I guess. Do you feel that that's a sense and that's something that that might work for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of funny because if you look back, like what I think it was Bark said earlier about how they thought this conservative government thought it was going to be easy to govern, and it hasn't been. It was kind of the opposite with the NDP, where they came in and were clearly overwhelmed when they took over, and then turned into a surprisingly competent government quickly. As far as just like the operations of being a governing party works, like they did a pretty good job. And I think there's definitely a lot of people looking at the Conservatives right now and being like, well, maybe we didn't have it so bad under the NDP. It's because I think you're talking earlier, like if it's these polling numbers are like rebellion against the Conservatives or like pro NDP. I don't think the NDP have lost that much support from when they were originally elected. Like they lost a few percentage points of the popular vote in the last election, but it was pretty close to what they were when they actually got elected in the first place. So I think the pro NDP people are staying there, and I think they don't really have to do anything right now. They have their track record that they ran off of that was pretty good, and they just have to wait until like the Kenny government has their weekly screw up, and then they can just go in front of a camera and be like, hey, like, we didn't do that. Like we're pretty competent, no problem. And I think that's all you don't have to overthink this. Like just let them keep. It's like Sideshow Bob when he keeps stepping on the rakes. That one episode of The Simpsons. It's like just let Jason Kenney walk around and step on rakes, and then Nolly can be like,
Yeah.
look at my face. I haven't been stepped on a single rake in my entire life. So, yeah, I don't think it was this huge. There's kind of like people try to make it as like the last election was this huge throwback against the NDP. It's like you did a bad job, so we elected the Conservatives again. It's like really no, like you lost a few percentage points from being the party in power, which kind of makes sense, and you were going against the United Conservative Party, so you lost. That's about it. Like there wasn't like Albertans weren't frothing at the mouth hating the NDP when they left last time. So I think a lot of the reasonable ones are looking at it now and being like, well, they would be doing a better job right now. At least from just like a lot of the things that the NDP screws up, like going to war against Netflix for a animated Bigfoot movie, you can look at the NDP party and be like, they wouldn't do something that stupid.
Yeah. But again, this now then circles back to the whole fight back thing, and people wanted a fighter. The Alberta wanted a fighter. That rhetoric, people were ready for that, and people wanted that at the time.
I mean, I think my kind of point is you could have put anyone in charge. Like Brian Jean could have been in charge of that combined Conservative Party and got the same result. You could have put.
Well, he almost was.
Yeah.
Allegedly, maybe he should have been because there's still the investigation into election fraud that's ongoing. So let's not forget that either.
Yeah, so
fighting against the election commissioner, that's another UCP battle.
I don't think
fighting against clean elections.
That's true. I don't think Alberta was like we weren't raring for like a guy to fight for us all the time. I think it's just there was a large percentage of Albertans that were going to vote Conservative no matter what, and that could have been either for one Conservative party or split between two Conservative parties, and whoever you put in charge of that one party was going to get those votes anyway. It could have been a very reasonable. They could put Joe Clark in charge of that party. They could put Stockwell Day in charge of that party. They could put Jason Kenney in charge of that party, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Albertans want us to fight all the time, and now it's kind of like maybe we didn't. Maybe we just wanted someone competent that would stand up for us, like. And it's like, if we are getting fucked over by the federal government, yeah, we should fight back. But are we getting fucked over this consistently that we need to fight back all the time? It's like, probably not. Probably the answer is in between the two.
Maybe that's what the failures of some of the fight back strategies has been.
And one more thing,
like, look at maybe there wasn't a fight here. Maybe there wasn't nothing to complain about. Anyway,
and we have to stop making the Alberta Party happen. I've said this before. The Alberta Party is Sam Bennett for the Calgary Flames, a forward that is just not going to be offensive force. people always like, ooh, what if the NDP combined with the Alberta Party? It's like, why on earth would you do that? so you could
We'll have to save that for
so
another.
you could gain like 1% of the popular vote in an election.
Why the Alberta Party has never been able to break through. We could save that for another time. I want to touch on the Conservatives while we have the federal Conservatives while we have some time left, because this is a story that made it across the pond over here into Europe. There was the UK papers were talking about it anyway. So I guess technically the UK is no longer part of Europe. Sorry, Brexit. Sorry, Brexit folks. They're going to be upset that I said that. But anyway, the story being that the Federal Conservative Party, under the leadership of Aaron O'Toole, had a policy convention last weekend. There was rumblings before the policy convention opened up. They were doing it online, obviously, in the times of COVID. That it was being sort of dominated. The early, ticket sales attendance for who was going to show up for the online policy convention was dominated by social conservatives. The types of social conservatives that have plagued Aaron O'Toole, I guess, since he took leadership. We remember Derek Sloan, who equated COVID vaccines to human experimentation, among other things. He was turfed from the caucus. There's been other issues popping up with the more, we'll say social conservative, we'll say right side of the base, right-leaning side of the federal conservative base. The woman in Ontario that equated or accused the Liberals of, what was it, turning people gay or condoning pedophilia or something. There was that one. There's a few other examples, but anyway, there was rumblings that they were going to sort of dominate this policy convention, and policy conventions don't necessarily dictate exactly what the government will do what the party will do if they become government. There's room, the leader has room even if they go against him or there's policies that get voted on that maybe they don't stick to, is what I'm saying. It's not 100% set in stone. But Aaron O'Toole on the Friday of the policy convention came out and gave his keynote speech in which he said the Conservative Party needs to have a robust climate plan. Very reasonable thing to say, I would think, looking at how the last elections have gone and looking at the polling on climate change in Canada, where the majority of Canadians believe it is a big issue and want the government to do something about it. Conservatives have been, for years, going against carbon tax and fighting that battle, which now might be over because of the Supreme Court decision we talked about. But anyway, so Aaron O'Toole has been trying to drag his party to the middle, back to the middle. They've been leaning a little further to the right than they normally do historically, and he's been trying to drag them to the middle. It doesn't appear to be working, and this was just the latest example where making the speech, talking about climate change, saying it's an issue, we need to have it. The headline coming out of the weekend was that his party, after that speech, voted against an amendment to the policy, the party policy, to acknowledge climate change as real. And this is all the headlines that we were seeing over here across the Atlantic. And again, we talked about Kenney seeming to not have a response to what seemed like an imminent loss in the Supreme Court. It didn't look like O'Toole had a good response or was aware that this might happen. Which you should be aware that this might happen. But it brings up some fracturing. We were talking about fracturing of the Conservative Party in Alberta. It brings up these issues with the federal Conservative Party and took the wind out of his sails. If there is a spring election, he was using this as a way to rebrand to Canadians, and it seems like his party said, no, we don't want that rebrand. So what does Aaron O'Toole do now? We'll start with you, Scott. Just what did you make of that? How big of a problem is it for him? And what does he got to do now if his goal is to bring the Conservative Party to the middle, where I think we would all agree they have to be if they want to have a sniff at winning the next election?
Yeah, I think this is a giant problem for O'Toole and for the party. I think they're facing a similar sort of dynamic that, the UCP here in Alberta, say the Republican Party in the United States, in that you've got kind of a lunatic fringe um, that is a relatively small portion of the base, at least hopefully, and at least here, maybe not so much down south. But so, to what extent do you try and placate the lunatic fringe at the expense of losing the center? And it would appear, just with the way the party is structured and who the delegates are that go to these conventions and that sort of thing, that the fringe is really winning, which is great for winning on the convention floor. It's not going to help them win the federal election, because I think we're right. They've been talking about how it's been years and years of the carbon tax is bad and our plan will be better, but no plan ever comes, because it's really easy to say this plan is terrible and ours will be better, but at some point you got to put pen to paper and make something
It's
happen.
also difficult to make that plan better than the current plan when majority of economists and policy experts are saying that the carbon tax, the carbon levy, with a pricing carbon is the best plan. So it's difficult to come up with something better when
it's like they need they can't call it a carbon tax, call it carbon levy, carbon pricing or something. And then, you could adjust the rebate program or what the money goes to. You can kind of fiddle at the margins there and say ours is better. But yeah, there's really no good way to come up with a better plan that doesn't involve pricing. That's basically the near universal consensus amongst economists and the people who actually study this stuff, that just price it and let the market sort it out. It's the cheapest and best way to do it. So if you just categorically have to take that option off the table because that's the liberal option and you've spent years and years stomping your feet about the evils of carbon taxes, then I don't know what they do, because I think if they were to tack to the center, there's certainly Trudeau is, I don't think he is beloved at this point. The lagging vaccine rates are certainly not helping his government. It seems there's a lot of room for a sensible centrist party, center-right party to come in and say, yeah, we're not going to be climate change deniers. We're not going to be, super socially conservative, because that's just not a winning election issue in Canada. Nobody seems to want to go back and reopen any of those debates. So in terms of what they need to do, seems clear to me, and that get serious about climate change, just excise the crazies and accept that we're going to lose support amongst the crazies and we're going to hopefully gain more amongst, kind of right-leaning liberal voters that are just, looking to say, I would rather have a sensible conservative party, but if I'm going to choose between the climate change deniers, if it's the climate change denial people or the liberals that I don't love but at least aren't crazy, they're going to vote for the not crazies. So it seems fairly obvious to me, but how he does it with kind of the nature of the party base and sort of the outsized influence that extremes tend to have in terms of the internal controls of the party. If they can't get 50% to vote that climate change is real, what do you do internally? Even if I would guess if you asked conservative voters, nationwide, how many of them would vote to say climate change is real? Probably 80+%. It's the makeup of party delegates really doesn't represent the actual makeup of their voters. And I think you'd hope to have to try and stress to these people to say, listen, do you want to win or not? Because you just, you got to shut up about all these, essentially just shut up about it, because it's not going to help us win. And if, we're going to support conversion therapy or things like that, sure, dream about that on your own, but shut up about it, because it's not going to help us win elections, and you're just going to get more Trudeau that way.
There was, I think it was a tweet from Aaron O'Toole, or it was a quote. It came up on my Twitter where it said, "Liberal scandals alone will not bring this government down." And that appeared 2019 showed us, because there was a number of liberal Justin Trudeau colored face scandals, and he still won, because the prevailing wisdom is that the conservatives seemed crazier, or seemed too conservative, seemed too to the right. I think last time we spoke, Steve, you said, we were talking about similar things. Is there going to be a spring election? What do the Conservatives have to do, kind of thing? And what will be the? You said between now and that election, Trudeau will give us something to. He'll bungle something. Basically, was your point. I mean, we haven't seen that yet. Maybe that's vaccines. Maybe it's the vaccine thing. Maybe that dogs him all the way. I'll go to you, Steve.
What is my prediction
Trudeau
for Trudeau's bungling?
well, yeah. Yeah, let's go there.
You pull something out of my ass? How's he gonna bungle it?
Well, no. I guess my point is just again jumping on this thing of like, what are we could talk about O'Toole and what he's going to do. Does he just anyone that sort of deviates from we're going to the middle? You're out of caucus. I'm publicly denouncing that part of the party. And come hell or high water, this is where we're going. Maybe I lose the election, but someone's got to do it. By God, maybe he uses that as a rallying cry. To the middle Conservatives or these voters that Stoley brought up, saying that they don't love the Liberals, but they're maybe the public battle against his party is he can bring in those voters, or steal some voters from the Liberals. I don't know. What do you see, and just what balancing that against the Liberals right now, and is there something that they can do that would be catastrophic, that none of this would matter?
Well, I think I've got the same basic take, and it's what Stoley said about just now about how the extreme of the party is inside of the tent. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a big tent with a lot of people, but my God,
it's moist.
That's the last place I want to be. You gotta get a smaller tent. Go it alone. Be in your own tent. Get yourself a nice sleeping bag. No, I don't know. These, so there was the resolution passed that said they do not believe in climate change.
Or they just didn't agree to put a statement in the...
Yeah, there's other wording.
They failed to say climate change is real. They didn't vote to say climate change isn't real, though, it seems to be kind of the...
also the survey question, it was very poorly worded, is my understanding. It wasn't just to say, do we admit that it's real, but also that we want to invest in green energy in order to do something about it. So it's like reading one of those really bad survey questions. And you're like, well, I think this is true, but I don't want to do this, so I'm going to just write no. That seems to me like what part of the problem is. So whoever was writing that question didn't do a very good job wording it. But Aaron O'Toole came out and said, hey, listen, I'm the leader, which is true. He doesn't have to do shit about this convention. These conventions, they seem like almost by design to be... circuses, and there's always bad press out of these big tent affairs. They get pretty smelly, and
man, I didn't realize you hated big tents so much.
The pandemic has done nothing for a lot of people in a big tent.
Not a fan of circuses, then, are you?
No, I'm not at all. Good Lord, don't even get me started on circuses. But it's neither here nor there. We have Peter O'Toole, who says, I'm the leader, which is...
Aaron O'Toole.
Right, Aaron O'Toole. He should change. He should rebrand.
His name.
He should...
O'Toole.
He should...
He should merge with Peter O'Toole.
Tool, too. Just become Peter
more
O.
like,
Peter
more like
O.
Aaron O'Fool, am I right?
Yeah. I don't know. He's... I watched a commercial with Aaron O'Toole, and this goes to what we're speaking of. The commercial starts, I'll just paint you a picture here. The commercial starts with someone on the Google search bar typing in, who is Aaron O'Toole? And they press enter, and then this is pretty funny. It goes to the next screen, which is, did you mean Aaron Brockovich? Ho ho ho! So the premise of the commercial is this guy's so unknown, that we have no clue who this person is, and that Google even thinks O'Toole must be Brockovich, because those are even similar to a certain degree.
That seems like the kind of joke that the Conservative Party would come up with.
Yeah, well, and that just, I don't know if that's another kind of like meta joke about how he spells his name. That's typically the female version of how you spell the name. So maybe they're trying to make sure that we know not only is this Aaron O'Toole, he's right here, he's also a man, a white, bald man. And so then
and he's aware that he spells his name in the feminine.
That's right.
He's in on the joke.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then it pans to him, and he's like, "This is who I am. I am Aaron O'Toole. And then it's nice to meet you. Now I'm getting back to work." And then he's not back to work. He's on a stroll. He's walking around.
I hope he's speaking exactly like that too. And he gets right in the camera. He's like, "I am Aaron O'Toole. Now back to work."
Our polling suggests that you have no idea who I am. Well, here I am, back to work. Good, thank you, Aaron. But and I only saw the commercial once.
It clearly was a hit.
It was
see
memorable.
A lot of commercials
it worked
a lot of times, but that one was only once. Because it repeats on the Sportsnet hockey feeds. They just repeat the same commercials. Yeah, we only get
3 commercials during
but
those
that
games.
one was only one time. Maybe someone went back and said, "What the hell is this commercial? What is it? Why do they think this is going to be Aaron Brockovich?" I don't think Google would say, "Did you mean Aaron Brockovich?" Should we be admitting?
Just not a good look.
Should we be admitting that nobody knows who the hell this guy is?
Also, that's such a dated reference. That's like a movie from the mid-90s.
No kidding. Get yourself a more relevant Aaron. Anyway, so this guy, he's set up to be not good. I don't know. I don't know enough about him, but it seems like he wants to do some good things, but he won't be able to do the good things because the party is too big of a tent. They should focus. They should narrow. They should become a more Tory-like government. And maybe Aaron O'Toole is the guy to lead that kind of party. I have no idea.
Well, we would have thought Peter MacKay would have been the guy to lead that.
Yeah.
The former progressive conservative Tory leader.
Sure.
But that didn't work.
So anyway, I largely agree with Scott about the fact that, hey, there's room for such a person to emerge, but there seems to be just barnacles on the hull, so to speak, that are slowing it down towards it needs to go. And it seems also like the barnacles might be angling the ship towards the shore and blocking everything that may pass. Those damn barnacles.
I love the nautical reference. Really paints a picture.
I like how we
from
went
the middle of the prairies.
I like how we went from tent referencing so smoothly. Wow, it wasn't smoothly at all. So smoothly towards the nautical references. That's the guy's truly a poet.
Well, if you got barnacles on your tent, then you're fucked.
you got big problems.
My doctor told me
Big
the same
problems.
thing.
Is that a scrotum reference?
Let's take it however it was more of a precautionary tale he told me. We were just sitting around. I was sitting around having a couple drinks with my doctor. He's like, "Coleman, let me tell you something." I'm like, "What's that, doc?" And he's like, "If you ever have barnacles on your hull, you're fucked."
Wow.
Then he took a big drag off his cigarette.
That's good. That's good. That's good advice. That's good advice.
Terrible.
These are the only doctors that are left in Alberta, right?
That's right.
He's definitely available.
Yeah. All right. Here's an interesting point that is not my point. Let's be real. All of my takes are recycled from articles and media that I'm influenced by.
It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic.
Yeah, that's what you get. This is what you get with, less than 2 hours of prep for this show.
That's 2
I thought
hours.
you guys were going to be like. I thought you guys were going to be a little impressed that I may have even done an hour.
No, that's an incredible amount. I think you're doing a good job, Brad. Good job.
Oh,
Does getting dressed
Yeah.
count as prep? Like I'm currently wearing
Yes.
clothes
Yeah, I don't
in
believe that at
preparation
all,
of.
Scully. There's a reason your camera's up.
Yeah, there's no evidence
There's
of
a
that.
reason I
Let me
don't
tell
have
you,
the
Brad, your
webcam.
mustache looks combed, coiffed. Looks great.
That's about
Is that
55 minutes of work.
nice? Yeah, there you go. That's what I
Yeah.
thought.
55
Um,
minutes. Wow.
Yeah. This you don't just roll out of bed like this. Well, I mean,
Some
can,
of
but-
us do. Not me. Not me. I gotta
the
chip
take
the
that I
barnacles
will
off.
recycle and put to you guys, we'll start with Coleman on it, but it was an interesting point that came up about this idea of the conservative movement being sort of dominated by the fringes, by the sort of excitable populist groups among them. And it was that they largely courted this group for fundraising. They brought up if you remember, this was brought up on the Strategists podcast, great Alberta and Canadian politics podcast. Better than this one, we'll see. Anyway, the point was that if you remember back to the Harper government, there was all of this talk about the how great they were at micro-targeting their advertising and stuff to the base. They were using sort of the social media tools and stuff to get support, get these financial support, all that kind of thing. And when you do that, what look at some of the ads that the Conservative Party are still running. It's these attack kind of get you outraged sort of ads. I mean, right after the riot in the U.S. That was spurred on by claims of election fraud, the Conservative Party of Canada ran an email ad to their supporters saying, with the big banner headline, "Justin Trudeau is rigging the election." At this point, the election hadn't even been announced or anything. It still hasn't been announced, but that was the kind of language they chose to run with after the event, like right after the events that we saw in the U.S. So it's that kind of the argument or the point brought up on the Strategist Pod was, is this, what do we do? Like that's your model to get financial donations, to get support and stuff. You're going to end up with this base. That's who's going to be here. That's who's going to be angling for a piece of the pie when you whip that up. Now, is there a better solution? Do you want all corporate money? Obviously not. But how do you balance that? I don't know. But I thought it was an interesting point, and I wonder, where you go from here. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that. I'll throw it to you first, Coleman. But
Yeah, I think it's a point you have. If you court that base for money to drive your political machine, you can't be surprised that they show up at your convention and fuck everything up. Like, it's just kind of. And I remember seeing that ad too, that like Justin Trudeau's rigging this election. It's like, we all know exactly why that ad was put in place. It had nothing to do with the election actually being rigged. It's that someone that works at a political consulting firm thought, hey, putting this language in an ad would probably get us a bump in fundraising. Like, that's clearly what happened. It probably worked. But then you go back to like Aaron O'Toole not having like, I remember hearing him talk after the climate change thing got voted down at the Conservative convention, and he's kind of just exasperated because clearly he's a guy that knows what they need to do. Like, their path to victory involves doing stuff like that, like having a climate change platform. And it's like, if the side of this party that they cater to all the time keeps coming in and throwing hand grenades into their operations, like, it's just not going to work. You're going to lose to Justin Trudeau again. I don't really see any way. I remember last time we did this podcast, I was asked like what he can do to overcome that, and I'm like, I don't think anything. I don't see any way that Justin Trudeau loses this next election against Aaron O'Toole. I just don't see any possible way to do it. I think the Conservatives federally do the exact same thing that they're kind of doing in Alberta, so you try and straddle these two different groups and run a party, and it's just really difficult to make both of them happy at this point. Especially because one side is growing, like I don't want to say far right, because it's not like everyone that on the far right of the Conservative Party is a white supremacist or anything like that. It's just, but that side, that angry side is growing, and they want their opinions heard, and they're very loud about it. And it's going to be really hard to run this social progressive party that would be a good party to challenge the Liberals. I just don't think there's numbers to support it at all. So then you have to do those ads where you're targeting people with rigged election claims and things like that to raise money. It's a tough spot for the federal Conservatives. Like I can see how someone like Aaron O'Toole would be very frustrated with trying to lead the party that he wants to, and I just don't think there's enough people in Canada that want to support it, if you know what I mean. Because I think we kind of get to before where when Harper brought the what would it back then, the Canadian Alliance and the Progressive Conservatives together. It's like those are both essentially minority parties at the end of the day, but together they have a chance at forming government. But apart, it's really tough to defeat the Liberals on a federal scale because the NDP is not going to chip. It would take a hell of a boner from the Trudeau government to lose enough support to make that viable. I just don't really think the numbers are there at all.
Well, and it's so just as we wind up here, focus on the Liberals and how big of a boner can they actually manufacture. I don't know if it's big enough. I don't know if it's the vaccine thing appears to not be big enough. I don't know. You guys are there. You know the temperature of the vaccine issue more than I do, but the numbers are going up every day in terms of who's getting how many people are getting vaccinated. So, if there's a hiccup in supply again, maybe, that could be it. The Wii scandal has died out. And I mean, I look at these things and say like, okay, so every Steve, you said, Canadian politics works best when there's ebb and flow, when there's change, when there's back and forth between parties. And every time that we've switched between liberal, conservative on the federal side, there's some minor kind of corruption scandal. There's something. I mean, the Wii thing, I don't know that it turned out, once you looked at the paper and the paper trail and everything like that, to be as nefarious as it was made out to be. Now there's, a bunch of, the We Charity is facing a number of questions about their ethical business dealings, but that's not, they'll obviously try to stain the government with that, but it has nothing to do with the government. Harper had his scandals, Mike Duffy and the Senate spending, robocalls, a number of other ones. I can't think of them all off the top of my head. Before that, was it Paul Martin and the ad scam, the ad corrupt, like sponsorship scandal. That's what I'm thinking of. It's like since I've been alive and able to had the mental capacity to follow Canadian politics, it's like mental capacity, the patience to follow the boring Canadian politics. There's always been a scandal. There's always been something, and eventually, the economy's down and the ruling party, people are like, all right, we've had enough. Justin Trudeau's won 2 elections. He's survived probably some of the bigger political scandals. The blackface one was, I am still so surprised that.
If anything was going to bring him down, I really would have thought the blackface scandal would have done it.
Yeah.
But I do think tolerance for scandal has just gone up North America wide amongst the electorate, and stuff that would have been absolutely career-ending 15 years ago now just kind of gets swept under the rug and people move on. And it probably helps that it seems the NDP is a bit loony to the left. The Conservative Party is certainly getting branded as a bit loony to the right. So then it's like, well, I don't love blackface or wasting our money on skeezy charities, but they still seem less bad than the other people. And I would say the overall sentiment, I don't meet a lot of people in Canada right now that are just super jazzed to vote for any particular party. It's a lot more like, well, I sort of bite my tongue and vote for the least worst. It seems to be the sense I get from most people, and it's easier, the Liberals and you're in the middle, to just seem like the least worst option.
Yeah, and they're still, again, barring the major disruptions to the vaccine rollout, they handled the pandemic quite well. the budget that they table will, dictate how that election goes as well, and whether they call an election and stuff like that. The economy is going to be the next thing, right? That's the next phase, is the economic recovery, and seems like the Conservatives would have that's their bread and butter, right? When you need good fiscal managers, go Conservative. Now, I mean, you could probably look at the data and make an argument that that's it doesn't.
But
They're not.
That's old
but
sour goat's butter.
Okay.
Is goat butter particularly sour? I'm not a
The
I'm not
old,
a foodie like you,
old
Bart.
sour.
Oh,
It's
that sounds like
aged.
someone would pay a lot of money for sour goat's butter.
But I think right now a message of like hard fiscal discipline, austerity is not going to sell to
No.
anybody. Just politically, it seems worldwide right now it's like open the floodgates and spend the money. So, if everyone else is every other country's doing it, it's going to be a lot harder to pitch the like, we need to actually, spend less money, raise taxes, and get our budgetary house in order. With interest rates where they're at, there's not a ton of appetite for that.
Yeah, well, then the message would have to be, who do you trust spending the money? Do you trust me, or do you trust Aaron Brockovich, or do you trust
Actually,
Justin
I do.
Trudeau?
I'd like to get Aaron.
I
Brockovich.
would trust
I
Aaron
do
Brockovich
have a lot of faith
more
in
than...
Aaron Brockovich, who I believe to be the leader of the Canadian
Yeah.
Conservative Party. I don't know. I don't know. It's someone named Aaron, and Brockovich was the first
That's
thing that
right.
came up
Yeah.
on Google. So I'm
Looks
assuming-
exactly like Julia Roberts.
So, so here's my my issue with the Liberal governance, and it won't end up being a scandal, but eventually they're going to have to do some accounting on how the last year has gone in terms of the money spent, and to me, this was the only issue with the We scandal as well is they need to actually show the money spent versus and what their budget is, which, I mean, I think we are going to see a budget. I don't know. Originally they said they were not going to release a budget.
They haven't released one since 2019, I believe.
It's exactly.
They just
They weren't
skipped it
gonna.
for
They weren't
2020.
gonna do it last year. So we need to see a budget, and we need to see the amount of money spent on the supports through the pandemic. And quite frankly, I agree that the taps should have been turned on completely and full force at the beginning, but they had plenty of time to go and be more surgical about it a couple months later, which they didn't really do. And the We thing as well, to me, is simply clumsy spending of money. At the time, they just thought that they could throw money at anything, everywhere. They didn't have to really think about it or do too much homework on it, and that to me is the We scandal. And now, of course, there's other kind of branches to go down, or avenues to go down, though, with how We paid members of the family, and how We is just such a crazy and seeming unethical and corrupt organization. So I don't know. Tax dollars need to be accounted, and if you're not willing to do that, then that's a really big issue, obviously, and it needs to be transparent as well. And so we'll see when that happens. I'm assuming
they're putting one out on the 19th.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
the first
assuming
budget in
the
2 years,
budget-
April 19th.
the budget is going to coincide with some kind of non-confidence, or and that's potentially what could trigger the election. So we need to see it, and it needs to be honest. I don't want to, and I don't trust it to be an honest retelling of what's happened. So
I could see the NDP carrying this budget through. They really, to this point, don't have any reason not to, or to go to an election, right? They don't, like,
no one
they're
has
not
a
in
reason.
any better spot.
No one has a reason to go to an election except potentially Trudeau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that's. Again, I'm saying I don't think that's a good use of a triggering of an early election.
No, I think
you
the
doing
best
it yourself. I don't think that's correct. I'm sure there's, like we talked about last time, that there's a mechanism for them to do it. I just disagree with that as a fundamental principle.
that's the risk, right? It could bite them in the ass. But like we said last time, there's provincial examples of that, making that cynical play of, hey, now it's good for me, so I'm going to do it. And even, in BC, they did it after saying they weren't going to do it and then called an election. And it still worked. So, I mean,
historically, that's been the talk. Every early election, it's like, will voters punish them for this sort of cynical move? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is no, they won't. I mean, there's the only reason you ever call an early election is you're convinced it's going to go well for you. And by and large, it does. So
I think, I like, just to wrap up here, because we're fresh out of time, but it seems that, fuck tents. We don't like tents. We don't want big tents. If we're conservatives, that's the message I'm getting. Clean the barnacles off your bag, off your tent.
Your tent.
Tent bag. I went with bag and not tent.
Tent bag.
Anywhere you have barnacles, get them off. Doesn't matter if it's a bag or a tent, a boat.
But I think that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting point. Is that you do have to, like, let's cut the dead weight. Let's scrape the barnacles. If you're the Conservatives, and if you can come up with a solid climate change plan, something reasonable. And you have an out now, too. There was another great opinion piece in the CBC by Aaron Wary, I think. I can't remember the name. But this is their out. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled it, the Conservatives can walk away and say, hey, well, we tried, but let's move forward and let's just deal with the parameters that the court have set out. This is their out. They can do that. They can do that and then hammer the trust issue of who do you trust to spend your money, and show us where the money has been spent. Maybe that's their path. But Aaron Brockovich has a difficult path forward. Anyone want to have one quick last word, or shall we end it there, gentlemen?
I've actually got some things to take care of barnacle wise.
I see you sharpening your barnacle knife.
Good reminder.
Now.
Good reminder.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's spring. It's tax season. It's barnacle season.
Yeah, those barnacles been building up all winter. Many winter months. It's warm in Edmonton. I'm gonna go out on a bike ride today. It's what I'm gonna do.
Oh wow, Mr.
It's
Fitness.
a lovely.
They're calling for up to 100-kilometer-an-hour winds in the afternoon. So go now.
In Edmonton?
Would be my advice to you.
We don't get winds in Edmonton.
Yeah.
No wind there.
All right.
No wind there. This man used to live in Lethbridge.
It's not 100 kilometers.
When Coleman's calling in from intensive care after getting thrown into the 7th story of a building in his bicycle.
It's only 8 kilometers an
calling
hour
in from
right
the
now.
ICU.
This is nothing.
Get out that bike sail.
That's not that much less than 100.
8 kilometers, only 92 kilometers an hour. As Bark says, I'm from Lethbridge. Like, even 100-kilometer-an-hour wind, it's like I'm not gonna let that ruin my day or anything. I'm gonna go about my business.
It's just another day in paradise. No, I'm super curious to see where things go, and if we do have this spring election. I think the vaccines have been slow enough that I kind of think we won't, but and we'll see if the Conservatives can move their tent, because to be honest, and Bark's going to hate this, but it's not the size of the tent, it's the location. That you just need to pick up those 4 posts and move the tent a little more to the middle, leave the crazies in the rain, and try and get some of the people who are on the just on the outside of other tents to join your tent. Because large tent size is winning. Voters love those big, beautiful tents.
You light up the barbecue outside your tent, and the people will come.
Well, I think you just need to
get the dogs on the queue, and the people will come.
You need to
if you build it, they will come. That famous line from Aaron Brockovich.
That's right. Great movie.
My experience with tents is you just need to open up the flaps a bit and vent the stank out, and it's okay.
All right, I can't wait.
Otherwise, you get barnacles.
I can't wait for the barnacle episode in the tent pod next time we meet. Thanks, guys, for being here. It's always a pleasure. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Brad.
God bless Alberta.
Follow at Lionel Steele.
Yeah, that's true. Losing a lot of followers lately. Thank
you. Losing.
There you have it. Follow us, Too Brad For You. Instagram, Twitter, at Too Brad For You. You can email the show, toobradforyou@gmail.com, and you can leave us a voice message, speakpipe.com, patreon.com/2bread for you. We haven't been losing followers, but we always want to gain a couple more. Rate, subscribe, all that stuff really helps us out. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it, and we will catch you next time. Bye for now.